Well, like moths to a flame, millions of Americans are being manipulated into yet another example of social contagion, not unlike the deranged militancy of the COVID era. During COVID, for those who have conveniently forgotten, the American left leveraged misinformation, fear, and panic to divide and oppress people from coast to coast. Today, as the Trump administration attempts to enforce the immigration laws, this tried and true phenomenon is again rearing its ugly head. The left does this by enticing Americans into focusing only on the micro issues surrounding immigration at the expense of the macro ones. Micro issues are more emotionally charged. Macro issues are more rational. They're more sober, based in reality, and therefore much harder to leverage to inflame the public. For instance, the tragic shooting of Alex Preddy, however important to discuss, is a micro issue. It is one incident out of tens of millions of interactions by local, state, and federal law enforcement annually. Thanks to social media, which favors left-wing messaging, Americans are conditioned to fixate on incidents like this rather than the larger issues involved. What is lost in the nonstop wall-to-wall coverage of Minneapolis are the more important challenges that provide critical context and warrant focus in our national conversation. The first macro issue is why have Democrats shifted their position so dramatically over the last decade to favor open borders and rampant illegal immigration? Prior to Joe Biden, Democrat President Bill Clinton, his wife Hillary, even President Barack Obama were very clear about the need to enforce immigration laws and deport illegals.
We need to do more to provide border security in southern Mexico.
They should be sent back now.
Well, they should be sent back as soon as it can be determined who responsible adults and their families are.
The budget I will present to you, we will try to do more to speed the deportation of illegal aliens who are arrested for crimes.
We simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked.
If you're a criminal, you'll be deported. If you plan to enter the U.S. illegally, your chances of getting caught and sent back just went up.
There can only be one reason for the dramatic change in course: politics, of course. The Constitution bases congressional and therefore electoral college representation on the number of people in each state, not the number of citizens. Now, true, there are efforts on the left to promote non-citizen voting, prisoner voting, and other ways to swell the voter rolls in their favor. But the most immediate benefit of illegal immigration is how it will impact the decennial census in 2030. Of course, over the course of the last decade, millions of Americans have fled high-cost Democrat-run states. That has decreased the power bases of the Democratic Party in favor of states like Florida and Texas and Tennessee. The latest projections for reapportionment in 2030 show the largest Democrat-run states losing between 8 and 10 congressional seats. That is a big loss of power. The most direct way to counter that population shift is to inject more non-citizens into the census. Waiting around for them to become citizens just takes too long. The census is in just 4 years. The added bonus for Democrats is how this all impacts spending on welfare and public education. More illegals benefit public employee unions, who are the backbone of the Democratic Party. Another macro issue is how we square adherence to the rule of law while selectively ignoring immigration laws that have been on the books for decades. This gets to the very heart of who we are as a nation. Are we a nation of laws or not? ICE, the Border Patrol, FBI, DEA, ATF, U.S. Marshal's Office, and other federal agencies have been operating for decades with broad support. Most of our immigration laws and immigration policy hasn't changed since the Reagan administration. But now, suddenly, according to Democrat politicians like Tampon Tim Walz, they are no longer legitimate law enforcement agencies. That is a dangerous position for any American to take, perhaps even more so than the left's defund the police nonsense from 2020. For everyone now blasting ICE, the immigration laws haven't changed. The law enforcement agencies haven't changed. The rules of engagement with criminal aliens haven't changed. The training for officers dealing with possibly dangerous individuals hasn't changed. The politics has changed. And politics is the wrong reason to change anything. The radicalization of Americans is another macro issue. When we think about radicalization, we often think about jihadists. But America is creating its own jihadi network that has nothing to do with Islam. It is increasingly clear that Americans are being radicalized by social media and the left-wing political ecosystem against basic American principles. Folks, this is not organic grassroots activism. It is astroturfing that is very well organized and well funded. It also appears to prey on those who have some form of mental illness, unresolved trauma, or anger issues. The numbers of white liberal women who openly exhibit this level of hostility and fanaticism should concern every American. Alex Preddy is naturally being framed by Democrats as a victim of Stasi-style tactics, and his killing may not have been wholly justifiable. I am not an expert. However, he had a history of violence against ICE. We've seen that in the videos that came out this week. Mr. Preddy also came to a protest with a gun that had multiple high-capacity magazines. The gun also had a holographic sight meant for shooting with accuracy at long distance and a threaded barrel. Why bring an offensive weapon into a situation where you are likely to engage with law enforcement in some way? Was he radicalized? And by whom? We don't know. Renee Good was immediately described as a regular soccer mom type who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Good, we now know, was part of several left-wing activist groups who trained Americans to interfere with law enforcement. She repeatedly refused to obey the commands of law enforcement, something that every elementary school kid used to be taught to do. She and her spouse were willing to risk arrest or worse to defend criminal illegals. They prioritized their activism over their responsibility to their own children. That is radicalism on par with jihadism. Finally, the biggest macro issue of them all. That is all but ignored these days by the critics of the Trump immigration enforcement policy. What do you do with the more than 11 million illegals Biden let into the country? We know from detailed DHS records that hundreds of thousands of illegals had existing criminal records, ties to terrorism, drug cartels, human trafficking, gangs, jihadists, and even communist China. Still, countless others have committed crimes since they came into the United States. For all the sound bites and F-bombs and calls for ICE to leave this city or that, not one Democrat has articulated a coherent alternative to enforcing the laws that are on the books. And of course, that makes perfect sense in the context of the political strategy behind the shift in immigration policy that I articulated earlier. All Americans must appreciate the very real psychological operation that is going on here and resist it. COVID softened up the population, and now the left is at it again. The result won't just be demonizing unvaccinated people or strict adherence to practices that have no grounding in science. It will be a nation where the rule of law is degraded immeasurably for political gain. Micro issues are important too, but you can't live on a bag of Doritos, folks. The macro issues are the republic's protein. Don't take the bait on social media to think only about Alex Preddy. The issues here are much bigger, and ignoring them makes you either a pawn or part of the problem.